When I do lists of guitarists, the greatest guitarists, or whether the greatest British guitarists, or the greatest jazz fusion guitarists, or the greatest prog guitarists, I always feel like there's a whole raft of guitarists I love that I miss out. And the only way I can bring them all together under one category is by calling them the guitarists from the outer limits. And by the outer limits, I don't just mean space, but many of these sound like they have come from space, but I mean the outer limits of genre itself. Guitarists who were happy enough just to play, you know, a few Hendrix licks, you know, maybe nail Smoke on the Water, maybe then move on to getting the guitar solo to Hotel California name. That wasn't enough for them. They wanted to use the guitar for what it should be used as, which is an instrument of exploration sonically, to be able to take the guitar, you know, from its humble Spanish beginnings of some little acoustic instrument that you could strum a few open chords and sing some songs to girls on a beach and maybe get a bit of interest because you've nailed some song that they like and they can sing along with you. And then they think that you're a sort of a emotionally open man with skills, you know, even though you've only learnt 3 chords, you have to keep it quiet that anybody can do that. You know, yeah, that wasn't enough for you. You wanted to take the idea of the guitar as a synthetic instrument. A guitar where you can conduct the very air molecules themselves by using distortion and feedback and wah-wah and effects and delay. And by utilising that sound and the fact that the guitar is on you and it's vibrating in the room at high volume, you know, the greatest instrument ever invented in the 20th century. And by doing that, you can explore sounds that no one's ever heard before. You've never heard them before. There's a whole bunch of guitarists that, for me, were exploring the outer limits of guitar. Some of them were doing it in mainstream bands. Some of them were doing it off in the world where no one's ever heard of them. And we're going to be looking at all those guitarists. And I can now champion these players. Some of my favourite guitar players. And I don't get to mention them. All these guitar players are some of my favourite guitar players. Are you ready to start the ranking from 10 to 1? Sonic pioneers, voyagers into the outer limits of vibration, wielders of string and wood, to create colours and vistas that explore and explain our existential position on this planet, but in a way that makes us see the world in a different way. I'm not being pretentious. This is actually what these guys do. The guy at number 1 did it for the whole of the world. Change the sound, not of the guitar, change the sound of the world. That's what the electric guitar did. Synthesis is cool. Sampling is cool. All this stuff's cool. All this myriad of bizarre sounds that weren't available to anybody 100 years ago. If you wanted a sound, you had to pick up a flute or something like that and get a sound out of it. The electric guitar does neither of these. A guitar plugged into an amp at high volume with distortion and feedback and maybe a few effects in there is able to create sounds that are out of control, which synths don't do. Well, the early analog synths did to somewhat. But when you're manipulating an analog synth, you don't look like Jimi Hendrix, do you? You can't set it on fire. Well, you could set it on fire, but they were so expensive at the time you wouldn't have wanted to. The guitar is a unique instrument, both phallic and feminine, embodied in one. You caress it and hold it like a baby, or maybe a sexual partner. And by manipulating it in certain ways, you can make it scream in a way. And I'm not going to go. Where are you going with this, Andy? You're getting all fruity. Fruity you are. This is supposed to be a serious video. The next one's going to be stupid. Right, stop, scrub all that. Pretend I hadn't even did any of that. Should we just start now? You're going out over the top then. You were getting carried away with yourself. Right, at number 10, I have a guitarist from a mainstream band. I have the guitarist of Rage Against the Machine. You know, the sort of angry communist post-grunge rap metal band from the 90s that made some incredible albums, jumped around a lot and swore a lot and told us that we needed to tear down society and build a new one in their image. You know that band? Rage Against the Machine. Oh, they did Rage Against the Machine. What machine it was they was raging at, I have no idea. It was most likely a photocopier. I found if I'm ever raged at a machine, it's usually a photocopier. Although I do have a coffee machine that I'm getting quite annoyed with at the moment. Anyway, within that band is the great Tom Morello. And now, Tom Morello, forgetting the politics, come on, I know you want to talk about it, Andy. That's all you're interested in now, isn't it? You know, but we won't go there with Tom Morello's politics. There he is, doesn't look like a guitar hero, does he? He was in some like hair metal rock band before. Go and check it out. He wasn't a great guitarist in that band. He got a little bit of chops, but he got no musicality. He couldn't play. He couldn't play like a Joe Satriani or a Steve Vai. So what do you do when you're in that realm? Well, what you do is you go and search for other sounds, which is what he does. And he almost like pulls the sound from machines. But obviously, his main influence on the guitar is coming from hip-hop and really listening to what scratch DJs do behind rappers, because he's suddenly behind a rapper and he takes the place of the turntablist. And by using things like the old Digitech whammy pedal, a bit of that, he has a little button on his guitar so he can shut the guitar off and down and get that, and he gets all that going. And then a few, feedback and distortion. Not that much, actually. I've probably gone through the effect wah-wah pedal, I think, one of those. Once you've got all that going on, he is able to forge a sound that is really incredible and was very fresh in the 90s when, we got past all that sort of Steve Vai shreddy guitar playing, and we got players like, Kim Thile from Soundgarden, or maybe even Kurt Cobain, and it all got very sort of, quite exciting for me. I like a little bit of chops. But Tom Morello was doing something different, incredible guitar players. So if you've got the idea, a guitarist that don't make the usual sound, Tom Morello's like, we've started off with that, straight in, now it gets weird. Right, at number 9, I have the great David Torn. Now, I wish I could tell you loads and loads about David Torn, but I can't. I know that he sort of emerged maybe late 70s, early 80s. As a guitarist, he seems to be somewhere between the sort of ambienty, tonal colour guitar playing of a Fripp or an Adrian Belew. He also is pulling in from sort of modern classical music, ambient music, electronic music. He's also pulling in from jazz. And this guy has a ton of chops. There's an album he made that I can't remember the title of, but I'll stick it up here, that he made with El Shanker, and his playing's quite incredible on that. But I know him from 2 absolutely incredible albums where he does some of the most great guitar playing, really outer limits guitar playing. The first would be Cloud About Mercury, that he was made in the 1980s, that had Bill Bruford on drums, Tony Levin on bass, Torn was on guitar. Who else was on that album? It could have been Mark Isham, not too sure. But all of those instrumentalists, Levin, Bruford and David Torn, are pushing the instruments to a limit. When this stuff was coming out in the 80s and early 90s, it was so exciting because we'd had all that virtuoso guitar playing in the 70s and the 80s. And then guitarists start to really re-examine the guitar. A lot of the stuff that the Outer Limits guitarists had done in the 1970s actually showed up in the hands of Andy Summers, who was doing it himself, and guitarists who'd been influenced, like The Edge from U2. And well, there's a completely different guitar sound in the 80s. But then there was a whole breed of them taking it forward, and David Torn was one of those players. Cloud About Mercury is basically a power trio, and I think it's got trumpet in it as well, I think. But that nothing sounds like it should. And people have forgotten this. We've all got so conservative when it comes to drums, bass, guitar, and everybody just wants it to sound like, they all want a Fender P bass, and they all want to sound like James Jamerson, and every drummer wants to sound like, Steve Jordan, and that's all great. But the idea of using the instrument to create new sounds and explore that stuff is not done. David Torn is a great guitar player for that. a few years later, he made an album with Terry Bozzio and Mick Karn. And I've put the cover of the album up there. Can't remember the title of it. Which I thought I would when I wrote Dave Tour down. I thought, I know all this stuff. But that album, again, is a monumental album. I can't remember the title of it. It's incredible. And again, Terry Bozzio and Mick Karn have both rethought the sound of the drums and the bass. And then you have Dave Tour coming in, doing some incredible playing. And not just the sort of usual ambient stuff that he's known for. Really pushing it out. Some incredible playing. Dave Tour. I wish I could tell you a little bit more about him. If there's an interest there, I'll do a bit of research and come back and do a video on David Torn. There's a lot of these guitar players I'm very happy to being able to shine a light on. I think the next three, without doubt, it's very exciting to be able to shine a light on these players. And these players are out there now. So I have next the three preeminent, what we would call free jazz players, free jazz guitar players. Each one's completely different to the next. I wouldn't categorize them in that way myself. I think they're all doing a different thing. At number 8, I have the incredible James Blood Ulmer. Now, James Blood Ulmer was born in 1940. He's still around. He's 85 years old. He is still out there playing. Now, James Blood Ulmer is really like, he's almost like a blues guitarist, straight down the line blues guitarist. So imagine you've got a blues guitarist that's immersed himself in the blues, that when he plays, he goes right back Albert King, you know, B.B. King, all the Kings, past the Kings, and then right back to the early, you know, Blind Blake and all those players from the 1920s and 30s, the Charlie Pattons, the Robert Johnsons. And he's got that all in his playing. James Blood Ulmer also sings, and he has a voice. He sounds like he's the real deal. He's what I call, he is in touch with the source. He goes to the source, right? But when he emerges in the mid-70s, he emerges alongside Ornette Coleman, who is exploring this harmonic approach, and he's moving towards a sort of fusion approach. And James Blood Ulmer gets brought into that, but unlike guitarists like Burn Nix and those guitarists that were working with Ornette at the time that were playing straight harmonic guitar, James Blood Ulmer approaches it with this heavy blues sound. And he records some of the great, you know, sort of harmonic albums of the late 70s, early 80s. I'm thinking of Freelancing would be an album to go for if you want to hear in that style. And then he starts singing and he goes back to the blues. And there's a whole host of albums that I find very interesting. He made some albums with Bill Laswell, and he's still going now. I've a friend of the channel is a guy called Calvin Weston, who was Ornette Coleman's drummer in prime time, and they're still out there playing. And you know, James Blood is like 85 years old, and I don't know whether he's up for doing an interview. I will let Calvin know. I would love to interview him, but I would. He is like, you're in touch with the source there. James Blood, you're in touch with the source. And of all the people I've interviewed, I would feel that I was talking to someone that goes right back to something that would be humbling. I don't know whether I'd be able to do that interview with James Blood Ulmer. I really love his playing. It's very interesting. Another guitarist that emerged actually in the late 60s and became the sort of preeminent American free jazz guitarist was Sonny Sharrock. Sonny Sharrock really was exploring the outer limits of guitar. Noise, distortion, feedback, everything. And, he was come at it like a bull out of a china shop. He actually got pulled in the late 60s on a number of key albums. Memphis Underground by Herbie Mann. Herbie Mann was right at the commercial end of jazz fusion that was emerging then, and he sort of did these sort of quite funky albums, but he brought in a Sonny Sharrock that provides this bizarre sort of psychedelic free jazz element in the background. It's also worth checking him out on the Wayne Shorter album Supernova, where he's pitted against John McLaughlin. John McLaughlin's playing pretty out there, but he's up against Sonny Sharrock, who's really playing out there. You've got this amount of out there from John, and then this amount. It's really interesting to listen to these two guitarists scurrying in the corners within this sort of extremely dense and very Wayne Shortery approach to free jazz. He crops up on Jack Johnson and on the side too. People aren't aware of that. He made a number of incredible albums throughout the early 70s, including ones with his wife, who was a singer called Linda Sharrock. And then in the 90s and 2000s, he hooked up with Bill Laswell, recording for his Axiom label. And there is an album called Ask the Ages, which is a power trio of him, Elvin Jones, and I think Shawnette Moffett on bass. It's unbelievable. He also did an album called Guitar, which is just him playing on its own. And you think free jazz guitarist like this, was this going to work? Incredible. Sonny Sharrock was on fire. And in the 80s, he formed a supergroup with Bill Laswell, which also featured the great Ronald Shannon Jackson on drums and Peter Brotzman on saxophone. And this band seemed intent of pushing the outer limits, And they make Napalm Death sound like ABBA. Last Exit, a sound to behold. But the thing that really pushes it over the edge is the coruscating, I'm going to use that word, coruscating sound of Sonny Sharrock on the guitar. An incredible player to be approached with caution, but I love him. He's a powerhouse. He's a powerhouse. He was a powerhouse. He died relatively young, I think around about the age of 50, of a heart attack I think it was in 1990, something like that. So, or was it 2000? Can't remember. He didn't last long, poor guy. Incredible. Above him, at number 6, I have the last of these free jazz guitarists, and for me, this is the guy, Derek Bailey. Right, who's Derek Bailey? Some of you all know who Derek Bailey is. This is why I'm doing this list. Can you imagine doing a top 10 guitarist list? You've got Derek Bailey and you've got Sonny Sharrock on it. This is what we need. Derek Bailey started life as a sort of very British, controlled, sit-down guitar player who would want to, it was working in the session world, doing a lot of sessions for BBC. He could read a proper guitar playing, he could play everything, he'd studied the guitar. And then with the burgeoning free jazz scene in the UK that started in the 1960s, taking its lead from the sort of American free jazz, but coming at it in a much more British attitude, Derek Bailey started to forge his own roots. And he really just takes the guitar and he really sees it as a way of creating sounds in almost like a self-exploratory way. And Derek Bailey is one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, really, for a number of reasons. Not only his free jazz guitar playing, but also the fact that he was so deeply involved with Company. Now, Company was a group of British free jazz musicians that would put on Company Week, which would bring in all these players, and they would all get to just play the most abstract, weirdest, strangest music. But he was unafraid of upsetting the apple cart. In 1991, I can remember he brought the 17-year-old Buckethead over from the States to sit there with a bucket on his head and his big white face mask on, whilst playing the most death-defying, heavy metal, post Sean Lane guitar. And he put this into company weeks. They had all these intellectual free jazz players reacting off that. He was well known that he would get home and then tune into some pirate drum and bass jungle radio station and jam over the top of that if he felt that was his want. And it was his want, and that was recorded on tape, and he put that out as a recording. He also did some really, for free jazz, some quite high profile recordings. I'm thinking of the Sign of Four album that he made with Pat Metheny and Greg Bendian and Paul Wertico. And that's really out there. I mean, Pat Metheny every now and then explored the outer limits of free jazz, and that's the one. He also did the first album with Tony Williams and Bill Laswell as a power trio, which was called Arcana, and that is something else, one of the last recorded sessions of Tony Williams. So he's done all sorts of stuff. Now, one of the friends of this channel is Ben Watson, the Zappa biographer that also wrote the biography on Derek Bailey. And if there's an interest in Derek Bailey, I will bring Ben on to talk about Derek Bailey, because the first few times he's mentioned him to me in these various interviews we've done, I've always found it very interesting and sometimes profound, some of the things that Derek Bailey has said to him. Because I think Derek Bailey had eventually, by the time he did come to, to be the full force that we knew just before he died, he had really he saw different music in a fundamentally different way to us, I think. And on one of the interviews I did with Ben Watson, he said he once decided to go around and do one of those sort of Leonard Feather type, blindfold tests where you play a musician a bunch of tracks, don't tell them who they are, and they just react. And when he said to Derek Bailey want to do this, and he said, what are we supposed to do? And he goes, and Ben Watson said, well, just sit and listen to the music. And he goes, well, do we hold hands and look into each other's eyes? Because I believe that Derek Bailey had moved from seeing music as being even a listening experience. It was much more about a doing experience. He wrote a book called Improvisation, which is a standard text. And anybody who's interested in studying this sort of stuff, as we discuss here, that's an essential text. He also, and I hope some of this is on YouTube, he made a series for Channel 4 based upon his book, where he looked at all aspects of improvisation, and that series of documentaries was so important to me in rethinking what music is. So we're pretty low on the list now. I've said all that, an absolute giant of 20th century music, although very, very obscure. Number 6, Derek Bailey. At number 5, I have Adrian Belew. ギターで動物の鳴き声を奏でたいなんて夢見た男がいた。Now, Adrian Belew is a guitarist that I should really talk about more on this channel. When I think of Outer Limits guitar players, when I think of guitarists that have taken a completely different approach, that really see the guitar as being an instrument of synthesis there to bring new sounds into the world, I think of Adrian Belew. And Adrian Belew is also a songwriter. He's a brilliant singer and a brilliant songwriter. So he never falls into the chops trap. He has a ton of technique, but it's not normal technique. I don't think the guy could alternate pick. I don't think he can do an upstroke. But he was able to play with the likes of Frank Zappa, with King Crimson, David Bowie, and do all sorts of incredible stuff. Belew is something else. He really is a visionary guitar player. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. this year for me has been a funny year in terms of YouTube, and there's been a lot going on. I've sort of plateaued a little bit, and I was talking to my patrons the other day, and you know, and the great Scott Bookman, who is one of he's one of the great patrons. He really needs to have his own video here. Old Scott does, but he's a wonderful man, a very creative person. He was 68 years old. Couldn't believe how old he is because he's hidden behind a huge white beard. But Scott Bookman is a very important patron for this channel. You don't realise some of the people behind this. And when he thought I might be a little bit low, he went and got Adrian Belew to send me this.
Hey Andy, it's me, Adrian Belew. I'm sitting here in Monterrey, Mexico. Today is going to be the very first show of the South American Beat Tour. And I know you do a lot of YouTube stuff, and I'm really happy that you do that because it's helped bands like us out a lot to have more and more people know about what we're doing, and I notice a lot more young people coming to the shows and things, and thank you for doing that. You have a podcast, I guess? Yeah, that's a great thing to have. So anyway, I'm just sitting here and thinking about the day that I have. It's an important day, and it's going to be a little rough, and your friend Scott told me that you just had a birthday, and you're a little down, a little bummed out. Well, don't be bummed out because, you know, you service the people that love music, and it's a very good thing to do.
Now, what can you say? Adrian Belew, sitting cross-legged, giving me sage words of advice. I can't say anything more about the bloke. Shall we move on? At number 4, in King Crimson, the other guy that was stood next to, or actually sat next to Adrian Belew, was Robert Fripp. Now, Robert Fripp, I think, is the original British progressive rock outer limits guitar player. If you listen to 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson, and you listen to what's going on in the guitar, all that sort of virtuosity, the ability to play all those insane lines. No one had ever done that before. And then at some point, it just drops into this guitar solo. And it's almost like electric jazz. The drums are playing, but they're not swinging, they're straight. The bass is walking, but it sounds like the biggest bass in the whole world. It's shaking the whole room. And Fripp comes in with these distorted lines, which are angular, but legato. And that guitar sound had never been heard before. It's the first time we ever hear this sound. And then from then on, Fripp goes deeper and deeper into what the guitar can do. The sort of guitarists that exist in the sort of mainstream world of progressive rock, you know, the Steve Howes and the Steve Hackett's and... you know, those type of players that were in these sort of, you know, the Dave Gilmours in these huge prog bands. Fripp is without doubt one of the technically most advanced and one of the sort of most innovative guitar players. As time goes on and he teams up with Brion and they start to look at the whole Frippatronics things where he uses tape delays to create sort of these tumbling sounds, which now everybody does on a loop station, or you think of the sort of feedback, sort of ambient spaces he creates on Heroes for David Bowie, and then the way he really redefines the guitar with King Crimson, acting almost like a gamelan orchestra between him and Adrian Belew, and using guitar synthesis to really change the sound of guitar. Fripp, something else. I can't say much more about him. It's so obvious. I've got him at number 4. Right, at number 3, I have the 3 Outer Limits guitarists. So these are all legendary guitarists now. I know we have some sort of obscure ones, but these are legendary guitarists. At number 3, I have got Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen was not just the guitarist that learned, developed tapping and played in this great big multi-million selling band that sort of rescued Rocky in the late 70s. He was an innovator, not just in guitar playing, but in the guitar. So he had a sound in his head, and that meant that he would look at the guitar from a completely different way. He looked at the amps, he looked at the way the voltage worked. He noticed things that was happening with voltage in the way the stages work inside the guitar. I said the word stages, I don't know what that means, but in the sort of gain stages, which is based upon the voltage, something like that. He was into all this. He could solder and take stuff apart and wire things up. And so he changes the way amps work. He changes the way the voltage works within amps. In terms of the actual guitar, he really does the work to develop the Floyd Rhodes tremolo arm. A tremolo arm will do more than just make you sound like Hank Marvin, where you can bend the notes, drop them down and get all sorts of sounds out of it. He also looks at the pickups, and he actually ends up gluing his pickups together, which is now a standard thing, as is playing a Strat type guitar with a humbucking pickup on it, right? If you go into a guitar shop and you buy a guitar and it's got a Floyd Rose arm, a tremolo arm on it, glued pickups and a humbucker on a sort of Strat shape, this is Eddie Van Halen. And he wasn't doing this just to be able to play rock. It's because he was continually pushing the outer limits of what the guitar sounded like. When we heard Eruption in the late 70s, we didn't know what he was doing. It wasn't like it was like amazing because it was fast or technical. We just didn't know what he was doing. When he followed that up with Spanish Fly on the second album, we didn't know what he was doing. Bloody hell, what's he doing on electric guitar? That Eruption, it's incredible. Yeah, but it's because electric guitar, he couldn't do that on acoustic guitar. Bang. You listen to Cathedral and the way he uses a dotted eighth note delay to create all these sorts of violin effects, And you can go on, and he was always exploring. Eddie Van Halen really needs to go down in history for being what he was, which was a guitar engineer. He rethought the guitar from the ground up. And every aspect of it he was exploring. And then once he created that sound, the things he did on the guitar was so heartfelt, right? He was able to play, he didn't fall back on sort of blues cliches or, standard rock guitar type of stuff, but then he didn't sound like it wasn't rock guitar. And the story of him ending up playing for nothing on Beat It by Michael Jackson, which really took his guitar sound and then flung it across the whole of modern culture, is a testament to how great he was. That it wasn't just a rock guitar solo that was required for that track. It was something that sounded like it was coming from another planet. And if you remember in Back to the Future, when Michael J. Fox goes back to meet his dad as a younger guy and he has to freak him out, so he pretends to be an alien and puts on some crash helmet and then sticks some headphones on his dad and puts on a tape of Eddie Van Halen playing the guitar to emulate the sound of the Outer Limits. This is what this video is about. I'm done. Number 3, we're going to move on to number 2. At number 2, I have Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck is a stalwart of that British London music scene that created rock music. These are the guitarists that weren't going to the outer limits. These are the guitarists that were laying the groundwork for the standard way you play the guitar, whether it be, Jimmy Page, whether it be Eric Clapton or Peter Green, who had really taken sort of an approach to blues guitar and applied it with the use of the Marshall amp and a bit of distortion to create this new rock guitar sound. Great, that's what rock guitar is. Within that, Jeff Beck emerges in 65, and he's come out of that, he's this sort of post-skiffle, post-blues, he's also into Cliff Gallup a lot, so from Gene Vincent's band. So he's got a few extra choppy things going on, but he really isn't interested in trying to play the blues great like Clapton is. He's not interested in that. He's interested in exploring the outer limits of the guitar, and he does it. He's one of the first guys to do this, really. And his use of feedback and his use of droning effects, his use of distortion on a series of guitar solos just mark him out of having a completely unique sound. As time goes on, he doesn't end up in some sort of classic rock band in the 1970s, just being the sort of emblem guitarist of that band. He pioneers his own voice, and despite the fact that he ends up making instrumental albums, those instrumental albums sell in the millions, and the reason they sell in the millions is because Jeff Beck had a sound. He had a voice, and he could sing a song like a singer can sing a song. It was like buying a Frank Sinatra or Ella Fitzgerald album. You bought the album to hear Jeff Beck play, and it wasn't about chops, because a lot of the time he just plays tunes. That's what he's great at. He's a great guitarist at playing the tunes. As the 70s, 80s, 90s progress, he moves from Les Paul to a Strat. His sound changes. He then loses the plectrum. He starts to explore his own way of using fingers and tapping, and he really explores the tremolo. I'm using, I think, a standard Strat tremolo to really do the most advanced tremolo guitar playing or whammy bar guitar playing of all time. He's interested in voices, he's interested in all sorts of different styles of music. He never stopped innovating, and he never stopped changing what he was doing. What he was doing on guitar at the end of his life was sounding nothing like what he was doing at the beginning of his career. But yet, he still always sounded like Jeff Beck. So that's who I've got at number 2. At number 1, of course, it's perhaps the greatest guitar player of all time, isn't it? Jimi Hendrix. Now, you all know what Jimi Hendrix is. You all know that he not only was an incredible rock guitarist, incredible singer-songwriter, incredible in the studio, bringing in jazz and blues and all these things, disparate elements together. We all know that's what Jimmy did. But Jimmy did more than that, because Jimmy was iconic. And I think that's the key to Jimmy. My nan, who died in 1970, same year as Jimi Hendrix, was a fan of Jimi Hendrix because he would crop up on the television. And although she was very old at the time, or relatively old, and she was really in a generation that shouldn't have been interested in Jimi Hendrix at the time, she liked him because of this huge character that emanated from him. And we're all aware of that. Jimi Hendrix was quite a shy guy, wasn't he? He was quite a shy bloke. But then when he stood up on stage, it was like there was an energy beaming from him. And what was that energy that he had? It's hard to explain. It's very exotic, isn't it? He must have seemed very exotic when he arrived in London, with his big hats and the feathers coming out of everywhere and all that type of thing going on. Great big afro. He must have seemed very exotic. And then people would have gone in, and this is a guy that had come up through the sort of American chitlin circuit, so he knew how to entertain an audience. It wasn't enough to just stand there, just playing like Jimmy Page or Jeff Beck did. That wasn't enough. He'd stick the guitar between his legs, he'd play it with his teeth behind his neck, all that T-Bone Walker thing that was second nature to any guitarist coming up with that. No one has seen that in London. And he wasn't doing it to entertain as such, because with all the feedback and distortion, he'd restructured that chitlin entertainment thing into being a statement of intent. Right, so he's going to blow your mind. That's the thing with Hendrix. Hendrix is going to blow your mind. Right, he's going to take you and he's going to pick you up and throw you into the future. And when you land, you're going to go, where the hell am I now? He's like a shooting star falling to earth. He's not around for a long time, but while he is there, he just burns out, and the colours and the lights that shoot from him as he passes basically change music forever. With Hendrix, it's not just in his guitar playing. His guitar playing is an expression of him, and he is an expression of his guitar playing. It's all there. The blues obviously really important to his sound, but he takes the blues and he wrenches it through something else. He is almost like an intuitive jazz musician, an intuitive modal explorer. I don't think he knows that he was doing that, but I think he's hearing people like Coltrane, and he wants to take his playing and move it towards that. But it still doesn't explain what he emanates as a player. I can't think of any other player like it. He really occupies he's like a pinnacle. If you want to look at rock music, and you start with Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry, then you look at the Beatles and all that type of stuff, and then you see the sort of incredible stuff that the Mavish Nuxtra and all the prog bands did, and then punk and all that. But there's a mountain peak around about 69, 70, and it's Hendrix. And it's Band of Gypsies. It's that guitar solo on Machine Gun. It's still unsurpassed. And it sits at the crossroads of jazz, prog, improvisation, noise, avant-garde, and the blues. It sits at all of those, and it's not rock and roll. There's no hooks, there's no songs, there's no riffs. It's just a sort of transcendental state that he puts you in. And he's putting you in that. When he was recording that, it was New Year's Eve. The 60s were ending, the 70s were about to start. And what brought the 70s in for the world was that guitar solo on Machine Gun. A few months before, he'd played at Woodstock, and he'd come out and he'd played the Star Spangled Banner. That's the most sort of conservative, based tune that you can play in America. There's nothing more establishment than the Star Spangled Banner. And he plays it in a way where he seems to have deep respect for it. If you actually listen to the way he plays it, it's very easy. And I've said this, then he takes it and does. He doesn't. He just plays it. Right? He plays it, and then he stops playing it, and he goes out on an excursion, which is pure noise. Right? But what the place he's taken the guitar to at that point, when it plays the Star Spangled Banner, it shows his pride in America and what America represents, but it also is a challenge to America and what's going on. And we know what he's criticising. It's what's going on in Vietnam, where people who are the same colour of him are fighting a war against a bunch of people that they don't want to be fighting, in a place where they don't want to end up dying. And he does all this in front of thousands and thousands of people at Woodstock. Right, on a film. It goes out into the whole world, and everybody who knows their rock history knows that that's one of the moments. But that moment isn't like any other moment in rock history, because what he's doing is avant-garde. It's totally way out, and yet the world gets it. And that was Hendrix's great achievement, was to be able to communicate this to the people so that they got it. There's a moment in Star Spangled Banner when it is just pure avant-garde noise. And even people like Albert Ayler and Peter Brochman were unable to get to the sheer, outer limits noise that he's making on that, because he's got this new thing in his hand, and it's a guitar strap through a Marshall at high volume. And he's able to sculpt things that we've never heard. Hendrix is the guy, right? And Star Spangled Banner is the high point. It's when rock music goes beyond rock music, but still... it's still rooted in mainstream culture. It's still having a cultural effect. From that point, it wasn't going to go on. All that stuff was going to go into sort of the esoteric music that we cover here, whilst rock music would lose its dream and then just end up being, you know, pop music by the 70s, disco or whatever. He's the high watermark, isn't he? Jimmy is. If you like this video, stick a like on it. If you want to see some more, you can subscribe. If you want to become a patron, there's a link down below and you can become a patron. If you want to put some money in my PayPal tip jar, there's a link down below, or you can become a member. There's so much stuff you can do. You just look down below. Sick of saying it at the end of every single video, but I've got to, because without that I can't keep the channel running. Thank you all for watching this video. I salute you all, music fans out there in the world. Keep supporting music, keep supporting me, and most important, keep listening. But the point is when they get there, right, there seems to be a power structure there, and that seems to be the enemy. But what you find out is not that. The real evil, the heart of Star Wars' evil is not the people who are running the show. It's the Dark Lord himself, Satan, Darth Vader. And we see Darth Vader at the start. We see Darth Vader and Princess Leia. We see purity, virginity, and we see Darth Vader all in one. Hello, welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be trying to explain the meaning, or at least the meaning how I see, of the film Interstellar that was made in 2014, directed by Christopher Nolan.
Come in, Lancaster. Are you bailing out?
Yes, Jude, I'm bailing out, but there's a catch. I've got no parachute.
Hello, and welcome to this video. And on this video, I am going to be ranking the films of Powell and Pressburger.
The bomb must never go off.
If you want to see a brilliant example of that, go and check out Freddie Starr telling the story to Muhammad Ali.
He opens the door and there's an old lady with a blanket around her. She's shivering.